Hello and welcome to Marketing Global Edition with me, Jasmine Montgomery.
And me, Piers Geiler. So, Jasmine, what are we going to talk about today?
Well, a subject that I've been fascinated by for several years now.
Ooh, I wonder what that could be. I mean, you've brought in some pretty quirky stuff in the past. So, Mr. Beast, Dubai Chocolate, the infamous Labubu, which actually did quite well.
Don't worry, it's nothing quite as silly as
I
any of
missed that
those.
one.
Today, yeah, you missed Labubu. Today, and I guess we're sort of really coincidentally, you and I have both happened to be in really African settings. But anyway, this reflects personal passions of ours. But today, it's fintech in Africa.
Of course it is, Jasmine. Of course it is. And why would
Yeah.
that be then?
Well, because I think it is one of the most fascinating subjects. It's been this incredible explosion. There have just been fintechs bursting out all over the continent, and there are some really terrific companies emerging. So there are 9 unicorns in Africa. Obviously, by unicorn, we mean privately held company with a valuation over $1 billion. And 8 of them are in fintech. But they almost all have quite rubbish branding. So I feel like they need our advice, Skylar.
I see. So you think a company like Flutterwaves, with a valuation of $3 billion, needs to hear from us in our little podcast?
Yes, I do. I really do. I feel they need our help. I mean, it's very easy to get dazzled by valuations, but behind the $3 billion of Flutterwaves and the 1.7 billion of somebody like Waves are stories about logos, about agents, about kiosks, even penguins. And I think we need to discuss them because some of them are terrific. There are some very clever things that fintechs have done to reach their customers that are great learnings, and some, frankly, are kind of disasters.
Okay. Well, let's start with what we mean by fintechs in Africa. So Africa still does 90% of its transactions in cash. Imagine that. Wow. Absolutely amazing, isn't it? And a huge number of people are what they term unbanked because either they don't have a steady income and they don't necessarily have a fixed abode in which they can have an address in which to open a bank account.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible. Apparently, about half the continent are still unbanked. So, fintech businesses, companies that provide banking services using technology rather than a network of branches, have sprung up all over Africa. And we've talked before on this podcast about the pioneer of a lot of this, M-Pesa, but there are a whole bunch of new brands like Wave, Nala, Grey, Moneypoint, to name a very few. And today, we're going to take a look at how fintech marketing differs from traditional financial services banks marketing. And we're going to ask the question about whether or not the current category language of African fintechs needs an upgrade.
Okay. And do you know, in less than 10 years, Africa's gone from a handful of money mobile pioneers to more than 600 active fintechs. So you mentioned something like, well, I think I mentioned earlier, Flutterwave, but there's OPay, Wave, Interswitch, MNT, Hallen, not a great name actually, have become household, brand names, and what they're doing there, they are literally moving billions of dollars a day and serving hundreds of millions of people who once had no formal bank account.
Yeah, and I think, it's much more than just a little sort of nice tech story. It's a really wholesale shift in how money moves, how small businesses get capital, how consumers pay, borrow, and save. It's also one of the continent's most dynamic branding laboratories, I guess, which is what I find so interesting about it, because these companies aren't just selling apps, they're trying to build trust, reliability, and scale in markets where half the adult population has historically been unbanked. A lot of people are illiterate. They read signs and symbols differently. They need that trust and reassurance that branding brings. And these companies are kind of hothousing a new way of doing things.
Okay, so in this episode, we're going to look at how this explosion has happened, why these brands matter, how they've marketed themselves differently from those traditional banks, and what that tells us about Africa's next big branding stories. So we'll be forgetting about cliches on leapfrogging and stuff like that. This is real companies, real users, and very real marketing challenges.
Yeah, and always we're probably going to argue a little bit about our perspectives. So we're going to be asking questions like, do we believe that fintechs are creating a new kind of African brand, or are they just getting away with subpar branding because they're part of a technologically driven gold rush where, it doesn't matter what you do, you're going to win. Are they building lasting brands or just chasing great big valuations?
Okay. And when you say fintech in London or New York, people probably think about slick budgeting apps or frictionless card payment systems and things like that. But in Accra or Dhaka, it's not a lifestyle accessory. In reality, it's a lifeline.
Yeah, so if you imagine a factory worker in Ghana earning a daily wage, a few dollars a day perhaps, 10 years ago, she'd have been paid in cash, kept it at home under the mattress, and maybe given it to a relative for safekeeping. And paying bills meant queuing at utility office for hours in the hot sun, or like sending money to her mother in the village might have meant giving cash to a bus driver and hoping and praying it arrived, which is what used to happen. And obviously, half the time it didn't. But
Yeah.
now she's likely to have a mobile money wallet on her phone, and her wages can be deposited directly. And she can pay electricity bills or school fees with just a few taps. And she can send money back to the village, or even these days access things like micro loans or save small amounts that build a credit history. And that credit history becomes something that's really valuable, and customers can trade off and get more and more products on the basis of.
Okay. Another example that might help is, in Senegal, a fisherman or a street trader might use Wave to top up airtime, pay suppliers, and send money back to the family without ever even setting foot in a bank branch. So these are not like edgy cases. They're hundreds of millions of people whose first experience of formal finance, interestingly, is on a screen, not across a counter.
Yeah, and I think that's why branding matters so much, because for so many of these users, who have to they have to trust in a fintech brand, not kind of the marble columns of a bank, and that sense of going into a bank, and that sense that probably somewhere in the back of the vault was enough gold bullion to kind of back up the institution.
Yeah.
That's gone in the world of fintech, right? So now it's about kind of branding. It's about color schemes, names, agents and branded t-shirts. These are all signals of reliability in a very low trust environment. So marketing isn't just about customer acquisition here. It's about actually the confidence that your money won't vanish.
So when we talk about the explosion of fintech, it's not just down, app downloads. It's actually
Right.
reshaping of daily life for workers, traders, small businesses who've skipped the 20th century banking model altogether.
Yeah, and I guess it's an explosion of new brands with some really interesting lessons for businesses globally in terms of how to connect with customers in emerging markets.
Any fintech story, I want to say, has to start with M-Pesa. M-Pesa was launched back in 2007. It's old now, yeah, by
Well,
Safaricom in Kenya. We've spoken about it before. At the time when they launched it in 2007, fewer than a quarter of Kenyans had a bank account, and almost everyone had a mobile phone. So
mhm.
Safaricom allowed them to text money like they'd send airtime. Perfect.
Yeah, I mean, it really has been incredible in Kenya. It's become the de facto banking system. So by 2010, millions of users the people were using it, and it's spread to Tanzania, Mozambique, Ghana, and yet, and so I mean, it's literally the success story it's the global pioneer of this incredible revolution, right? Of kind of peer-to-peer banking, and yet it's got one of the worst logos I've ever come across. Right, shocking design. It's essentially a kind of a bit of clip art of some money on a clip art old handset. They've updated the handset, but on Safaricom Green, no brand guidelines, no mascot, no like good crafting. I mean, it looks like somebody's nephew did it for a case of beer. It's a disaster.
You see, I think that's why it could have worked. It was unbank like. It's completely different from those big, corporates. It was unthreatening. So, what it had was Safaricom's green, which is a real lens of trust. People
Yeah,
loved
true.
Safaricom back in 2007. It was a great launch pad. And I think the logo was unthreatening.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can see the grassroots argument, but I think if at the time, and I don't know, I mean, I sort of disagree, but it's an interesting perspective. But I think if it launched today, certainly in a more competitive market, it would be slaughtered. The service carried the brand, not the other way around. And a brand should be out in front. It should lead the product or service. And in this case, the service was way out in front of the brand, kind of tagged along behind. So, but I think today's fintechs in a much more competitive marketplace, they don't have that luxury.
And yet it was a huge success.
Yes, but in spite of the branding, not because of it. So, interestingly, I had the pleasure of meeting Michael Joseph, the CEO of Safaricom, who helped bring M-Pesa to life. And he credits M-Pesa's success largely to the huge network of agents that M-Pesa
Mm.
had spread out all over Kenya. So from what I know of Michael Joseph, a number of times I met him, and super smart man, but I don't think he was a huge believer in branding, funnily enough, or he's not in sort of logo crafting, certainly. Um, but he talked about, how much they invested in training thousands of small agents. Because it was so interesting. They just got corner shop owners, mobile money kiosks. Sometimes it was like a person sitting on an upturned crate on the side of the road selling bananas, and acting as an M-Pesa agent. So these were people who acted as brand ambassadors. They would pay out cash for text messages. So you bring your phone along. These were real humans that people knew and could trust. It was amazing.
Okay, okay. So it was through agents, not branding. I get that. And instead of national
Yeah.
TV celebrity endorsements, fintechs have been copying M-Pesa, and they've also been investing, thousands in small agents. The fintechs are
Mhm.
using corner shop owners, as you said, mobile money kiosks, and they are all ambassadors for many more fintechs that have come out.
Yeah, so I think for them, the brand is the agent's shirt. It's a little, it's a sign of kind of service reliability. And the real insight here is that in a low trust environment, the brand is the local human who cashes you
Mhm.
in and out, not just the slick UX UI design of the app.
Yeah, so there's actually two lessons here we're talking about. One is the human branch network, if you like, these individuals that you trust, and two is looking inclusive, going back to the green, going back to the interesting logo, and I think every fintech's trying to replicate that formula of the network of humans and looking more and more inclusive. But you could
Yeah,
argue
but
that.
in many ways, I think that the brands who are trying to replicate that formula, which they've all been trying to do since M-Pesa launched, have replicated the terrible design aesthetics of M-Pesa, thinking that it was a feature and not a bug. But personally, I think it was a bug. I think they
See, I
just
think it was a feature, not a bug. I think it really contributed to M-Pesa's sense of inclusivity, its approachableness. So what do you think of Senegal's brand Wave? I think it's got a cute logo with a penguin.
Yeah, so Wave is an interesting one. I love the brand actually in many ways, or I think it's got huge potential. So Wave launched in Senegal in 2018 as a kind of challenger to Orange Money.
Hmm.
Had two American founders, and it was quite famous. It had sort of like M-Pesa, it picked a color, so it did sort of this single color thing because that's quite good for sort of people, particularly in a low, literacy place, to just have that color recognition, tells you where you are. They did cyan blue kiosks everywhere. They did some clever things. They've got a penguin mascot that I think we'll talk more about in a second. I quite like the penguin mascot. And they were crystal clear about one thing, which is that they charge 1% flat fee for all your transactions. And that was very cut through in the market.
Wow. Okay, so they nailed three things actually at once. They had a bilingual
Mhm.
name, Wave,
Yeah.
works just as well as in English as it does in French. Two, they had a fantastic price promise of the 1% fee. And then lastly, of course, an instantly recognizable motif and color, I suppose, with the
Yeah,
penguin.
so I think they've been brave. They've got this little penguin. He's really cute. But like where I think it's really frustrating is, if you look at their Instagram feed, their feed is like all the other fintechs, right? So what everybody does, the category language is you have color blocked branded templates with boring messages. Everybody does that. We've got a color and we've got these templates and we stick them on Instagram or Facebook. And then they have interspersed with these kind of pseudo user generated, apparently cool, but actually quite cheesy, cringy young people doing quasi cringe videos about how they use the product to send money. And Wade have this penguin, but they never have him do anything fun. So apart from putting a Santa hat on him at Christmas, they just don't use their penguin properly.
Well, maybe restraint is wise. Maybe Senegalese consumers don't really want a meme penguin running their money.
I think it's a majorly missed opportunity. And, there's a couple of ads for their summer products. I don't know what a fintech does with summer, like bikini, what you get your money bikini ready. But anyway, but they have these summer ads, and the ads are covered in like flip-flops and sunglasses and whatever, but nobody puts sunglasses on the penguin. They just have the penguin in the corner. Guys, seriously, you need to leverage your penguin. A penguin in the summer is full of comic potential. Did nobody see the snowman from Frozen singing about all the fun things he wants to do in summer? And like, if you look at the engagement they get, one of the penguin summer ads I looked at got 300 likes. I think some of the others got 500. But if you look at Duolingo, mascot, we've talked about before, Duolingo, the language learning app, totally different segment, but sex sector, but a mascot-based brand. Duolingo's mascot regularly gets over 30,000 likes because their mascot comes to life. He has personality. He, she, I'm not sure, does extraordinary things. They sweat their asset. They're really funny. It's really playful. It's credible. And this penguin could do dances. It could joke about remittances. It could do football memes. Right now, it's just wallpaper.
It's probably because the penguin's got really strict guidelines, and the Duolingo's mascot has been allowed people to have fun with it, which you need to on social, right? That's the
Yes,
difference. But anyway,
women, set your penguin free. Get him out of his straitjacket. I don't know why I'm so upset about this penguin.
still, what they did do is they've outmaneuvered the local incumbents on price and user experience. But the
Yeah.
question is, will they outmaneuver them in the long term on brand?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a brand with more to it than M-Pesa, but still a long way to go. I think a lot of these brands, maybe understandably in Africa, put kind of utility first and lifestyle later. So the early marketing messages really emphasize when you look at all of the markets, and I think, fintech is really big in places like Nigeria, Senegal, Ghana, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda. When you look at the marketing messages in all these countries, it's so much about, in the early days, what you can actually do. Send money home, pay bills, get a micro loan. And it's only after you kind of hit that inflection point of mass adoption do brands start to pivot to kind of more lifestyle aspirational themes. And we're starting to see that. So Time Bank is starting to look at savings goals. Flutterwave is kind of starting to tell SME growth stories. But it's quite interesting because clearly the insight that they've sort of all signed up to is this idea that you solve a pain point first and that the status messaging can wait for kind of the next phase in the adoption curve of all of this.
Okay. I mean, another thing I think they're clever is if you think about fintech brands around the world, as you'd expect, they're mobile first, right? And they use
Yeah,
their creativity and user experience because the people who got the best phones in the world, right? But
right.
get to Africa, most users are on low spec Android phones with patchy data. So, the leading firms in Africa are designing really lightweight apps and text message based interfaces, and they keep things really simple, which I think is clever.
Well, that is true. Yeah. So the marketing creative sort of mirrors that really kind of clear instructions, local languages, low file sizes. That's obviously really smart. Yeah,
Okay.
totally.
Let's talk about another one, Jasmine. So another interesting brand story is Grey, which began life as Aboki Africa in Nigeria. Grey is another fintech founded by Nigerian co-founders. It provides multi-currency bank accounts, a bit like Revolut, international money transfers and virtual debit cards to remote workers, freelancers, businesses. And in 2022, they rebranded to Grey. They joined Y Combinator. They all went over to Silicon
Mhm.
Valley and they
Mhm.
expanded to Latin America and Southeast Asia.
Yeah. On the one hand, you can really understand, I can understand it because it's a textbook move from kind of local and friendly to global and stable. But, part of me is just, it makes me sad that Aboki Africa, which is such a fun and
Mm.
interesting name, became Grey. And I believe that the backstory, from what I've seen, and I don't know if it's true, but from what I've heard, the backstory is that they actually had trademark conflicts and they had to change Aboki. But I'm quite surprised that Aboki actually was more conflicted out than Grey, because I mean, just off the top of my head, there's Grey ad agency. But
Hmm.
they rebranded, and the CEO, there was quite a pompous, well, not pompous, just predictable bit of bluster from the CEO, bless him, at the rebrand on the website. He said, Grey. I don't know what accent he would do it in, and I shouldn't, God forbid, I would try and do a Nigerian accent, but Grey is apparently solid and stable. It inspires, is what the CEO said. It inspires feelings of calm, balance, and composure. That is what we want people to feel every time they use our service, that certainty. And he said that this rebrand reflects the stability, neutrality, and solidity of our stance in the African financial service industry. grey is here to stay. And it's just so interesting. I think that's fascinating insight into kind of why a company would adopt a brand name like grey. They actually counter to kind of, I guess, my usual instincts, which are kind of differentiate, stand out in the market, be seen, get visibility, be colorful, be interesting, be African, be cool. They wanted to be solid, boring, and gray. And I guess, okay, fine. But I think gray, if you want to look like you're here to stay and really mean business, look at Revolut. They are sleek, world class, sexy, smart, techie in a really world class way.
But that's fascinating, actually, because, things have moved on fast in Africa and the brands have been bright, bold, crazy. And then they've decided to say, hey, no, actually, we're going to be, of the new fintech world, we're going to be the reliable, trusted corporate version within that world. So it's quite
Yeah.
interesting to do that. And I think that neutrality can be differentiation in a noisy field.
Yeah. I guess that's true. I mean, not every fintech can be neon. And that's true. A lot of the fintechs in Africa are using a lot of I think there's a lot of kind of category vernacular and they are starting to look alike. So it is important for them to try and find ways to differentiate. One of the things that drives me crazy is the way that they're all using these kind of user generated videos. And I think that the category is finding it hard to balance speaking the language of the customer with creating world class branding.
Yeah, I think on balance, they've been smart to speak the local language, feel quite user generated and young and approachable. It's the exact opposite of the category language of banks who've excluded so many Africans.
Yeah, I mean, certainly I can see that argument, but I kind of think it's termism because I think that in the long term, and as the category becomes more competitive, the challenge won't be setting themselves apart from the banks so much as differentiating from the other fintechs. And when that becomes the imperative, I think it'll be hardest for the brands that have done the least to sort of establish their brand in a really differentiated way. So suddenly speaking the same like category language as everyone else will be a problem.
Hmm. Yeah. But I suppose, in some of the more established categories like telcos, there's still been a lot of success with a very grassroots local approach to branding. So I'm thinking back to Nigeria, think about Glow. I mean, it's green, it's Nigerian, and it's got hilarity through it. I mean, its ads are just they're worth googling actually. Glow ads, they're funny.
They really are. They do these hilarious spoofs on Nigerian culture. I think we used to see them all the time on CNN, but so they actually had some kind of international airing, but they're very, very funny. Yeah, and I think we see a lot of videos on social for African fintechs that are trying to kind of capture some of that glow magic, trying to be funny, trying to look like they're done by real people. But I think there's a fine line between humor and rubbish advertising, and it's hard to get that user generated feel just right. And I also think you have to ask yourself, like, what are you actually trying to communicate when you try and do that beyond the humor?
Yes, fair. I think one brand that does it well is Nala. So Nala was founded by Benjamin Fernandez, a Stanford graduate who returned to Tanzania. They do a great job of bringing emotion to the party. Their tagline is "Send love home," and they talk about honoring your roots with every transaction. They're trying to make remittances emotional. And in a bold attempt to reframe a functional service, slogans aren't enough. The experience must match the sentiment. Sentiment.
Yeah, I mean, at least
My
they're
phone's
trying.
I'm sorry.
No, I agree with that. I think most fintechs still market like utilities, but quite a lot of them are doing a really smart job of educating consumers, spelling out how to use the service, how to understand complex financial concepts, which is going to bring us to part two in a second. But first, we're going to take a quick break. And in a moment, we'll be back talking about churches and football as routes to market. We'll be back in just a minute. Don't go away.
Marketing Global Edition is sponsored by Adsy, the ad generator for small businesses that serves you effective and affordable ads in seconds. And by Seven Brands, the international advertising and branding agency that has worked with clients around the world from Coca-Cola to Facebook.
Hi, we're back and talking about some of the innovative ways that fintechs in Africa have taken their brands to market.
And I think for a lot of them, community engagement and education have been really key.
Yeah, they're doing some really amazing things. There are some brands that are doing these great like road shows. They're sort of going to village meetings. They're going to festivals. They're throwing parties. They're putting kind of a whole party on the back of a flatbed truck and just driving into a village, unloading, throwing a party, going to markets, and just having that kind of really African exuberant energy. And doing sort of street theater, but they're also doing like radio explainers where they're really talking people through kind of teaching people how to use wallets or pay digitally. So brands like Flutterwave and Paystack are running SME training workshops as kind of quasi marketing. And I think that's really interesting, a great insight that kind of education is customer acquisition in a new category like fintech.
Okay. And in an attempt to get more emotional involvement from customers in Africa, the fintechs are really doing some interesting things in terms of channels. They're looking at festivals, football clubs, and even churches. So MTN Money sponsors entire leagues. Sport Pesa practically is football sponsorship, and M Copper sponsors a basketball team.
Yeah, I mean, football is particularly, very close to people's hearts. And I think in many markets, financial literacy or digital inclusion programs are being carried out through religious community networks. These are faith-based NGOs or churches. And I think that's really fascinating because, I can't think of another case study, certainly in outside of Africa, where we'd say that people are using churches as a marketing channel. So but it really makes sense in Africa, given their reach, their trust, the existing infrastructure for gatherings, and their ability to mobilize people. So, but even it's fascinating. Apparently, even in a lot of churches in Kenya, like you'll see LED banners running above the altar telling you how to make your church donation through digital payment platforms. So it's fascinating.
Are we missing something there? Why haven't we got massive advertising screens?
Yes, I know. I know. Church of England, take note.
Anyway, sorry. Yeah, yeah. Anyway, I think what's clever about it is football is the continent's mass medium. We know that, right? Africa, football is everywhere. But also churches are its social networks. A mention from a pastor or a logo on a kit reaches more people than a TV ad.
Yeah, and fintechs have done some really, really clever things. I love that. I love the churches in football. But there are still some huge challenges. And I think one of them is when it comes to organizational culture. Which I know is close to your heart, Piers, and sort of purpose and values and all that kind of thing. But I noticed something really interesting when I was looking at M-Copper's website. So M-Copper is another one of Kenya's kind of great fintech brands. And I was doing some research into M-Copper and trying to understand what they did, which is a very clever product. But on the leadership page of their website, they showed the 16 most senior leaders, right? And they had the chief people officer. But first of all, they have quite a dishy CEO and founder and a major cutie pie whose name is Jesse Moore. Jesse, if you're listening, hello. They have a chief people officer, a chief product officer. They've got a chief credit officer. They've got a chief legal and risk officer, chief technology officer. But I tell you what, they do not have, Piers Guylar, and that is they do not have a chief marketing officer.
Really, that is surprising. I guess it
And
just shows about what they care about and, that they're focused on tech and credit. But that is surprising.
I think it's shocking. And I think that as brands digitize and start to compete hugely with their budgets and their marketing know-how, and as new fintechs arrive, knowing that they're in kind of phase two of this, new age of fintechs, the technology won't be enough. These brands are going to need narrative, good design in whatever direction it wants to go in, whether that's sort of grassrootsy or more world classy. They're going to need differentiation, or they're going to risk being a commodity.
Okay, so let's look at challenges and the future for fintechs in Africa. McKinsey estimates fintechs will grow at 3 times the rate of banks between 2022 and 2028. And emerging markets are going to be fueling it. Africa, Asia Pac, Latin America, and the Middle East. But the easy growth is over.
Yeah, and although the growth is projected to be huge, it may not be easy. I think reaching scale and profitability in low income settings, navigating all the fragmented regulation, funding scarcity there was a 2021 VC boom, but that was killed mid COVID, and building robust governance in volatile environments. It's going to be hard. It's not going to be easy.
exactly. And on top of that, the brand challenge. It's a crowded field. You can't just be a
Yeah,
fintech. You have to do more than that now. You've got to be the fintech, I suppose. With a story, a
absolutely.
look, a voice.
Yeah, I think that's right. So I think fintech brands in Africa are going to have to think beyond single colors and bland slogans. They're going to have to sweat their mascot, Mr. Penguin wave, build campaigns that really make people smile, make people trust you. Otherwise, investors are going to start asking why your cost of customer acquisition is going up and your brand is invisible.
Okay. Well, look, African fintechs have rewritten the rules of distribution and customer acquisition, but most haven't yet rewritten the rules of branding.
Yeah, and we are very excited to watch them do that. We'd love to be part of it. We will be here to watch as they do. And in the meantime, thanks so much for listening. We have been Marketing Global Edition. Thank you so much.
We have indeed. Thanks very much. Lovely to have, I don't know, spoken to you. Bye.
Looking at you. See you next time. Bye.
Bye.